Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday Bible Study. Good to see you joining us tonight. There's no handouts for this lesson tonight. This will be part one of From Levi to Levites. Part two will not be next week. We're going to take a spring break off. So 2 weeks from tonight, From Levi to Levites part two. The week after that, From Levi to Levites, the cities of the Levites. So we'll have 3 lessons that are in a mini-series here. Levi is the third son of Jacob, who was renamed to Israel. He's a significant person in the story of Israel. When Levi and his older brother Simeon were young men, probably in their early 20s, they violently attacked the city of Shechem to avenge their sister Dinah. This unrestrained violence of Simeon and Levi caused their father Jacob to rebuke them and to prophesy that their 2 tribes would be scattered among the other tribes of Israel. Despite Levi's show of poor judgment and uncontrolled passion in his youth, the children of Levi were later selected by the Lord because they stood with Moses at the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai. Not only did they stand with Moses, but at his command, they were willing to go through the entire camp of Israel and kill all of the idolaters, even their own family members who happened to be worshiping the golden calf. And the Lord that day rewarded the children of Levi. He said, I want them to replace the firstborn of Israel as those that are holy to me, and I'm going to make them the priests and the caretakers of the tabernacle. Instead of receiving a land inheritance in the promised land, the Levites were given cities that were scattered throughout all the other tribes of Israel. Since they had no crops, they had no fields. There we go. They had to rely on tithes for support. They were scattered throughout the tribes because of God's judgment on Levi, because of his rage at the massacre of Shechem. But as it turned out, that scattering throughout Israel enabled them to fulfill their role as the priests of the Lord and as the protectors of the worship of Yahweh. So Levi reminds us that early failures in life do not define us. They do not even limit God in fulfilling his purpose in our lives. The Lord is not limited by our early failures. Levi gives hope to all of us who have had failures in life, but still love the Lord and still want to serve him. So that's an overview of this mini-series that we're starting tonight. So let's meet this person. Levi Jacobson. Great-grandfather was Abraham, grandfather was Isaac, father was Jacob, renamed to Israel, and Levi was one of 13 siblings. His mother's name was Leah. She was Jacob's first wife, but not his first choice. He chose Rachel, but he got Leah. And Jacob had 4 sons with Leah: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, and that's their birth order. So these were the first 4 children of Israel, and they were all, their mother was all Leah. Levi comes from the Hebrew. It probably means something like joined or attached, because when Leah had Levi, she wanted Jacob to be attached to her. In fact, she said, now surely my husband will be attached to me. So we think Levi means something like attached or joined. At Mount Sinai, the sons of Levi, called the Levites, stood with Moses against those who were worshiping the golden calf. Because they stood with Moses, the Lord chose them to replace the firstborn and to be separated from all the other tribes. They were to be special, set apart, and holy to the Lord. The Levites became the priests and the caretakers of the tabernacle later and in the temple in Jerusalem after it was built, and they were there to protect the worship of the Lord. So here we go, starting with the story of when Levi Jacobson was born. This is Genesis 29.
And Leah conceived again and gave birth to a son and said, "Now this time my husband, Israel, will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi."
All right, so now he was number 3, but let's look at Jacob's baby boom because they really boomed once Jacob got going. Leah, the older sister, produced 7 children. Reuben, Simeon, Levi was number 3, Judah was number 4, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah was number 7, the baby. Oh. Rachel's maid, Bilhah, produced Dan and Naphtali. Leah's maid, Zilpah, produced Gad and Asher. And then finally, the one that started all of this, the one that Jacob wanted from the very beginning, Rachel, the younger sister, produced Joseph and Benjamin. Much later, Benjamin was born. So Jacob had to come and he had to work for these wives. He had to work for them 14 years. And then I believe he worked a little bit more after that. But at some point, well, before we get to that, let me tell you this. You may have realized that I use artificial intelligence to create some of the pictures in our lessons. And so I wanted to get a family photo, a portrait of the Jacobsons. Here's what I got the first time I asked for Jacob, his 4 wives, and their 3 children. Okay, it looks good at first, but once you start counting, you're going to find out that there's a wife missing, so we're going to cross Bilhah off the list. You've got these older brothers. You've got these younger ones. Here's Dinah, but some of the middle are missing, so I crossed out Dan, Naphtali, and Gad. It's hard to get this many people together for a family photo, right? All right, so I thought, okay, well, I'll try another artificial intelligence engine, see if I can get better results, because, I plainly said, Jacob, 4 wives and 12 children, and that's the best it could give me. I don't know why. You would think a computer can count, right? That was one of the first things they were made for, was counting. All right, so I tried another one, and this is what I got. Well, it's a little different, but if you look closely, we've got some extra people in here. Bilhah is still missing. We've still only got 3 wives. But look at this, Laban. That's the grandfather. He's right there next to Jacob. And so Laban is in the picture. I didn't invite him. Somehow he got in there. And then if you count the children, you're going to find out that these must be 2 of the neighbors' kids. Because there's too many in this group. So again, the artificial intelligence could not come up with Jacob, 4 wives, and 12 children. So I thought, okay, there's also a problem in here. Does anybody see that? Reading glasses. Yeah, Jacob and this guy have reading glasses on. So does this wife. So I said plainly, give me Jacob, 4 wives, 12 children, and remove the eyeglasses, okay? This is what I got. At this point, I stopped trying to generate artificial intelligence pictures. But if you'll notice, we've still got Laban up here, the oldest man right here. He's not supposed to be in there. All the wives are there. All the children are there. And we got 1 extra neighbor's kid down here. He's the one without the glasses. That's how you know he's the neighbor's kid.
She bumped him too hard. They're bounced up there in the air, and that guy's catching them.
So, yeah, he is removing his glasses like I requested, but actually, I don't know where those glasses came from. So I gave up on that, but you get the idea. There was a lot of people in the household. Jacob, 4 wives, 12 children. That's the environment that Levi grew up in. All right. So, Levi and the Jacob sons were born in a place called Padan Aram, in Canaan. Okay? But they had a falling out with Laban, the pawpaw, the grandfather. And so Jacob decides overnight he's going to pull his entire family out, and they're going to go back to where he came from, to the land of Canaan. In fact, in Genesis 31, the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you." So Levi and the Jacob sons and the 4 baby mamas departed Padan Aram for Canaan, where Abraham had settled. But yet Abraham did not possess all the land God gave him. Why? Because he was just one person, and he didn't even have a son until he was 100 years old. So Abraham and his son, even his son Isaac and Ishmael, were not enough. That was only 3 people. They were not enough to possess the land that God promised them. So God said, it's going to take some time. In fact, your family is going to go down to Egypt, and they're going to be down there for 4 generations, the Lord said. And then the Lord said, I'm going to rescue them. And you know, this is exactly what happened. When Moses brought them out, it was 4 generations after they had been in Egypt. And so the Lord promised to Abraham, I'm going to bring them back. But here goes Jacob and his family back to the place where he was born. So I'm sure that was quite a caravan, because the Bible says he has hundreds of animals. Hundreds of animals. And he has men servants, and he has maid servants, and he's got his 4 wives and his 12 children. It's a big deal transporting all this group of people. So let's begin reading in Genesis 31, Jackie.
Then Jacob stood up and put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock and all his property which he had acquired, the livestock he possessed which he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan, to his father Isaac.
Okay, so he's going back to where he was born. And the point that we're making with this story is that Jacob was a teenager probably during this time, maybe around 15 or 16 years old, somewhere in there. He's in his teenage years. So think about this from the perspective of a teenage boy. He's the 3rd oldest, and he's got a lot of little siblings along, and he's got these other mothers in the mix, okay? Did we read this yet? No, let's read it now.
Now Jacob got up that same night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female slaves, and his 11 sons, and crossed the shallow place of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had.
So on their way back, they got to this stream or this brook called the Jabbok. It was nighttime. Jacob sent everything across the creek except himself. He stayed on the backside. And that's the night he wrestled with a man, the Bible says. And he wrestled all night till the break of day. And he said, what is your name? What is your name? And the man wouldn't tell him what his name was. And Jacob said, I won't let you go until you bless me. And the man touched his thigh. And from that day forward, Jacob had a limp. And also the man or the angel changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So this was a God experience that he had. His family is on the other side. He's completely alone. Gets up in the morning, he rejoins his family, and they continue on to the land of Canaan.
Then Jacob...
Nope, we're going backwards. Now we're going forwards. Now Levi and the Jacob sons see Uncle Esau coming toward them, and guess what? It doesn't look like a welcoming party. He's got 400 men with him. And these are not men that are singing and dancing. They're probably warriors. Why else would he bring 400 men with him? If you remember previously, Jacob had ripped Esau off of the birthright blessing. In other words, the biggest portion of the inheritance that came down from Abraham and down to Isaac. And now it was supposed to go to Esau. But Jacob tricked him and sold him a bowl of beans. Remember that story? And when Esau found out, he wanted to kill Jacob. That's why Jacob went on the run and got his wives and his children. And now he's coming back. God told him to come back, but he's going to have to face Uncle Esau. I'm saying Uncle Esau because it was Levi's uncle Esau. So what happened, Jackie?
Then Jacob raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 slave women. He put the slave women and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother.
It almost sounded like he was going to send them all ahead and he was going to stay behind, but then once he got them in order, and Levi is in Leah's group right here, that's why it's highlighted. Finally, Jacob went ahead of them and he faced Esau alone. And now Levi and all the Jacobsons are going to meet Uncle Levi. Let's see, I wonder if he's still angry.
Then Esau,
What did I say? Uncle Esau.
Levi.
Uncle Esau. Yeah, there you go.
Then Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept.
So Esau's anger is gone. He's happy to see Jacob. I don't know if they had a discussion or a meeting about the birthright, but somehow he's welcoming Jacob back. We don't have any mention in the Bible of them discussing the birthright, but he welcomes Jacob back, and Levi, as a teenager, saw these family interactions. Okay?
He raised his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the women came forward with their children, and they bowed down. Leah likewise came forward with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came forward with Rachel, and they bowed down.
So everybody bowed down to Uncle Esau, including Levi. There you go. So Jacob was probably heading to Bethel. That's where he had his first experience with the Lord. But he didn't quite make it to Bethel. He stopped near a little town called Shechem. Have you heard of it? Well, on a certain day, at a certain time, Levi's baby sister, number 7 from Leah, decides she's going to visit some of the girls in Shechem. And it turns out to be a catastrophe. Here we go.
Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the sons of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her and raped her.
Okay, I told you it was going to be bad, didn't I? All right. So interesting that we have a town called Shechem, and the prince of the land is Hamor, and his son is also called Shechem. So Hamor may have named the town from his son, or he may have named the son from the town, but same town and son name, okay? All right, so this happened to Dinah, and let's see what happened after that.
But he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife."
All right, so this is interesting. It was not just, it was an act of violence, but it wasn't just that. Or maybe it turned into something else, but at some point he decided, I want this woman to be my wife. So he went to his father, he said, "Get me this woman for my wife." All right?
Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob said nothing until they came in. Then Hamor, the son of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him.
Okay, so the fathers are going to have a meeting.
Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they had heard about it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done.
All right, so before the 10 Commandments, before the law of the Lord, they already knew that this wasn't right. They already knew that something like this should not be done. But Shechem wants to marry Dinah. So let's see what's going to happen.
But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage, and intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves." So you will live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it.
All right, let's join our families together. Let's have a common economy. Let's benefit off of each other. Let's trade women. Let's trade livestock. Let's get a mutual thing going between our two families, okay? That's what he's asking for.
Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your sight, and I will give whatever you tell me. Demand of me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give whatever you tell me. But give me the girl in marriage."
I missed that parallelism there, but twice he said, I will give whatever you tell me. Is that a wise statement to say to anybody? We should be careful about making blanket statements like that or open-ended statements with no restrictions. I will give whatever you tell me. If you ever say that to somebody, you're really putting yourself in a vulnerable place, right? You're saying, you make the conditions and whatever you say, I will comply with it. Not very smart, Shechem. All right, so it just so happens that Levi and the Jacobsons were smarter than these folks. Let's see what happens.
But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, that is, give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us."
Well, okay, Bible plainly says here that they were doing this with deceit. And as we're going to find out, we know that circumcision is their mark of their covenant with the Lord. They didn't mention anything about the Lord to the people in Shechem that we know of. But they did bring up this procedure called circumcision. And they said, we can't fellowship with you if you're not circumcised. They didn't say, we can't fellowship with you if you're not serving the Lord. It was just this circumcision. So let's see what happened.
"Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us, in that every male of you will be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go."
All right. So they've already said, whatever you say, we will do. So the Jacobsons present the terms of the agreement. You've got to be circumcised, or we're taking Dinah and we're going home with her. What do you think they're going to say? All right.
Now their words seemed reasonable to Hamor
Seemed reasonable.
and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do this because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father.
We never hear from Dinah in this entire story. She's probably not delighted with Shechem. Just saying. All right.
So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the people of their city, saying, "These men are friendly to us. Therefore let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them.
Okay.
Only on this condition will the men consent to us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised, just as they are circumcised. Will their livestock and their property and all their animals not be ours? Let's just consent to them, and they will live with us."
Now, when they presented the deal to the family, they didn't say, we're doing this because Shechem wants the girl. They left that out. They're just presenting the economic impact. We're going to trade with them. We're going to get women from them. We're going to trade livestock with them. They didn't tell them it's really, this whole thing is based on Shechem wanting to marry Dinah. Okay?
All who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city.
The entire town was circumcised. Okay, I don't know how that really occurred. Can you imagine? Everybody did each other, or I'm sure there was a long line at the clinic. I'm not sure how that happened, But I don't think these people really knew about it. I don't think they practiced circumcision. I think it was something that the Jacobsons brought to them. So
Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain,
they were in pain on the third day.
that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city undetected and killed every male.
Every male in the city, they killed every male. What kind of men are Simeon and Levi to kill every man in the town? He might have looked like that picture I had up here a minute ago, right? Looked like Samson, big old boy, you might say. How in the world? I know they were sore. The Bible says they were sore. They were in pain on the third day, but nobody could even get up and lock the door? I don't know. It's quite a thing for Levi and Simeon to kill all the men in the town of Shechem, okay?
They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left.
And got Dinah and got out of there. And that's not all. What are two brothers going to do when they have other brothers? They're going to go back and tell them what they did. So they go back and tell the other brothers, this is what we did. And
Jacob's sons came upon those killed and looted the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, and their donkeys, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field. And they captured and looted all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives, even everything that was in the houses.
everything inside, outside, all animals, all people, all women, all children. They got it all. The 12 brothers, actually 11 brothers at this time, the 11 brothers took and divided the spoils of the entire city between them. They all participated. Okay, now it's going to be impossible for them to keep this quiet, right? They've just gathered a city full of resources and women and children. And there's only 11 of them. So each one's going to have quite a group of women, children, and resources. Each one of them. All right, so of course Jacob is going to find out. What is Jacob going to say? Tell us, Jackie.
Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me repulsive among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since my men are few in number, they will band together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household."
So Jacob was really very self-centered here, doesn't it sound like? He's worried about what he's going to lose. Didn't really mention anything about Shechem, didn't really mention anything about the boys and all the new women in town and all the kids that they now have to take care of. And oh, where are we going to put all these animals? He's really worried that, now nobody at Shechem is going to do him any harm, right? Okay, but there are other towns around. He's worried about another town finding out. They're new to the area. They don't know how many friends Shechem has in Canaan. And he says these people, the inhabitants of the land, if they hear about this, they're probably just going to wipe us out. They don't want us rolling through Canaan, wiping out entire cities at a time. And so Jacob says, this is not a good thing. And how do you think the boys answered?
But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?"
And that was kind of the end of the conversation. Jacob did not have an answer for that because, of course, he did not want Dinah mistreated. But yet he wanted the boys to know that they have gone too far. This was retribution out of control. This is payback to the nth degree. It's more like just a raging massacre. Okay? Yes, Shechem committed a terrible thing against Dinah, against her father, against all the brothers in the family. But there was a lot of people in that city who were innocent. And that's the definition of a massacre. It's a mass killing of people that are innocent or defenseless. And so most of those men were innocent, and they were certainly defenseless due to the 3-day-old circumcision that was putting them in pain. So it was a massacre. It was unjustified, Jacob says. Did I get enough colors in that title right there? Almost got the entire rainbow. If you add the blue in there, that's 7 colors. I just hadn't talked about colors in a while, so I thought I'd throw that out there. I'm trying not to use too many colors, but they have meanings. All right, so Levi and the Jacobsons, this is going to be much years later. When life is good, that's when temptations come, right? Several years later, life is good for Jacob and the Jacobsons, and then they don't have any other problems, so they decide to start hating one of their brothers, the young one, Joseph, because he's Jacob's favorite. So there's jealousy. Have you ever had jealousy among your children? Where does that come from? It comes out of our hearts. We're born with it. Some people have it more than others, Billy. But several years later, this is going to happen. Levi and the Jacobsons were loved less, the Bible says, by their father than baby brother Joseph. 10 to 15 years after the massacre at Shechem, Levi and his brothers began to hate Joseph for his dreams and his words, and they could not speak to him on friendly terms. They were so hateful towards Joseph. Levi and the Jacobsons plotted to kill Joseph, and they were going to lie to their father about it. Levi and the Jacobsons found Joseph one day, stripped him of his multicolored robe that his father had made him, and they threw him into a pit with no water. Levi and the Jacobsons were going to kill him, but one of the brothers suggested, let's just sell him as a slave and tell our father that he died by an animal attack. These boys are pretty hateful to Joseph, wouldn't you say? Levi and the Jacobsons unknowingly bowed down to Joseph in Egypt at least 4 times. This is many years later when they went to buy grain and Joseph had become the ruler of Egypt. They did not recognize him. He had dreams back up in here where he said, you're going to bow down to me one day. And that's some of the reason they hated him. And actually, they did bow down to him in Egypt, but they didn't know it was Joseph they were bowing down to. And so Jacob decides to move the entire family of the Jacobsons down to Egypt to survive the famine. In Egypt, when Jacob is ready to die, he calls his 12 sons to his bedside, and he's going to give them their final instructions. He's going to bless them, and he's going to prophesy over them. So he calls his children together. Well, let's just read it. Jackie?
Then Jacob summoned his sons and said, assemble yourselves so that I may tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Gather together and listen, sons of Jacob. Yes, listen to Israel your father.
Okay, so he calls the children together. He's going to go down the family tree, the list of the siblings. He's going to start with the first one. Reuben is the firstborn. He says, Reuben, you are my firstborn. And we didn't cover the story of Reuben today, but there was a time when Reuben went into one of his father's concubines and lay with her. And because of that act, Reuben, the firstborn, was disqualified from receiving the birthright inheritance. So Jacob goes on and he tells the little short story about Reuben and how he's disqualified because he couldn't control himself. And then he goes to the second and third son, which you know is Simeon and Levi. And let's see what he says about Simeon and Levi.
Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. May my soul not enter into their council. May my glory not be united with their assembly. For in their anger they killed a man, and in their self-will they lamed an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them among Israel.
So this is Jacob. He's dying, but he's prophesying, and he's actually speaking as if he were the Lord. He's speaking for the Lord. That's what prophecy means, to speak for another. And so he says their swords were not swords of retribution or swords of justice, but they were swords of violence because they took it too far. They should not have killed every innocent man in the city for what one man had done. Jacob says, I don't want my soul to be connected with these people because they are violent. He said they killed people not out of justice, but out of anger and out of self-will. And it says they lamed an ox, so it's possible that they have committed atrocities against the animals, although it might just be another reference to the men there, because it does say a man and an ox. So it might be referring to the working population of the city as if they were an ox. But they have killed them in anger and in self-will. Jacob says they are cursed because they were controlled by their fierce anger, and they were cruel because of their wrath. And then he says this, I will scatter them in Jacob, and Jacob is the one talking, but he's really talking about his family, Israel. So Levi and Simeon are going to be scattered throughout the other tribes, and they're going to be dispersed among the other tribes. So both Simeon and Levi will be scattered among the other tribes because of their violence. In fulfillment of this, when they got into the promised land, Simeon was given a very small piece of land, and it was totally surrounded by the tribe of Judah. There was no way to get in and out of the land of Simeon without going through Judah. The entire area of Simeon was completely surrounded by Judah. So that's how that's how they were dispersed. They were small to begin with, and they eventually lost their identity, and they were absorbed into the tribe of Judah. So that was the outcome of this curse about how Simeon and Levi would be scattered and dispersed. But you say, what about Levi? Well, the Levites got no territory at all. Rather, they were to serve the Lord in the tabernacle. And we're going to talk about how that happened next week when we talk about the Levites. But they were given certain cities, but they had no land mass. So all of the cities that the Levites were given were in the other tribes. They did not have their own geographic region which belonged to them. They just had cities that were designated to the Levites throughout all the other tribes. So Jacob dies in Egypt. All his 12 sons die in Egypt. The next generation of the Jacobsons is born and dies in Egypt. The next generation of Jacob and Israel is born and dies in Egypt. And then the fourth generation is born, and in the fourth generation is a man you know named Moses. And he is a son of Levi. Moses leads the children of Israel out of Egypt by the power of God, but you know the story. When they get to the promised land, they refuse to go in, and the Lord says, back to the wilderness you go for 40 years. At the end of the 40-year period, we find ourselves in Deuteronomy chapter 33. We're at the end of Moses' life and at the end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And now Moses is going to pray to the Lord for all 12 tribes. So we're just going to focus on what he says about Levi, the tribe of Levi. You ready, Jackie?
Of Levi, he said, let your Thummim and your Urim belong to your godly man Levi.
All right, so this is a little cryptic, so we're going to take it real slow and break it down. This is actually poetic, I believe, in Hebrew. But so the Levites were chosen to serve the Lord and to not have any property, not have any land. They were given some cities, but they did not have farming land. They did not have grazing land. So they were supported by the tithes because they didn't grow their own food and they didn't grow their own animals. So they were supported by the tithe, and they worked in the tabernacle, and they camped around the tabernacle in the wilderness. They were there to protect the tabernacle. We're going to talk a lot more about Levites. I said next week, but I meant 2 weeks from now. But let's talk about this, because this is a little something that's not mentioned much in the Bible. I think only about 4 times we find this. But when Moses and the Lord gave Israel the instructions for the priests, which are the Levites. The Levites are the priests. And when the Lord gave Moses the instructions for their garments, he gave very detailed instructions about what they were supposed to wear when they were in the tabernacle ministering to the Lord. And they were to wear a breastplate, and then inside of the breastplate, they were to carry these 2 items. The Bible never explains to us what these were. It only tells us where they were and what their purpose was. It doesn't tell us how they were used or what they were. So, these words in Hebrew, Urim and Thummim, mean lights and perfection. Another interpretation would mean revelation and truth. And so the Lord tells Moses to tell the priest to keep these 2 objects, whatever they are, rocks, sticks. I mean, there were some rudimentary things because they're out in the wilderness, so they didn't have a lot to choose from to make objects from. But there's the Thummim and the Urim, and the priest is holding them in the breastplate, which is on his chest, over his heart, and they are used to decide answers from the Lord. Now, what happened with just hearing the voice of God, right? Well, that was for Moses, and that was for Joshua. But you've probably noticed that the Lord doesn't speak to us in a voice a lot. Have you noticed? You've got to really work at it sometimes to hear from the Lord, to get an impression from the Lord. But the Lord put these 2 objects in the priest's garment to wear them at all times, and at some point when he needed an answer from the Lord, he would take out the Urim and the Thummim, or the lights and the perfection, or the revelation and the truth, and he would use them somehow to discern the will of God. Well, that didn't answer many questions, did it? We don't know. We still don't know what they are, but the Bible doesn't tell us what they are. But it was something that the high priest wore to determine answers from the Lord. So back to the story of Moses. He's praying for the 12 tribes. Of the tribe of Levi, he said, "Let your Urim and your Thummim belong to your godly man." He's talking about Levi right here, and he calls Levi a godly man. Apparently, he changed. Apparently, he had a come to Jesus moment, you might want to say, after he was cursed by his father, Jacob. Sometime between the cursing of Jacob and the blessing of Moses, Levi became a godly man. All right, that's good news. It sounds like he's going in the right direction. Let's continue to read this.
Whom you tested at Massah, with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah.
All right, so now Moses is making references to the story of when they were traveling through the wilderness, and he's talking about this man Levi, this godly man, and he says the Lord tested Levi at Massah. What was Massah? That was the first place where they didn't have water and they griped, and the Lord told Moses to strike the rock and water will come out, and it did. And then again at Meribah, what was that? That was the second place where they had no water. And the Lord told Moses to speak to the rock. And Moses got angry and he struck the rock instead. And it still worked. He still got water out of the rock, but Moses was judged for that. So the Lord tested all of the children of Israel at Massah. And he contended with them at Meribah. And some of them passed the test, but most of them failed. Most of them griped, murmured, complained, said things about Moses, said things against Moses, but apparently not the godly man, Levi. All right? This is sounding great.
Who said of his father and his mother, I did not consider them. And he did not acknowledge his brothers, nor did he regard his own sons. For they kept your word and complied with your covenant.
Now Moses is talking about the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai. When Moses went up to get the 10 Commandments, he was up there 40 days. The people gave up on Moses. They said, we don't know if he's ever coming back. Let's build a golden calf. What do you say? And they built the golden calf, and Moses comes down and he sees it. He smashes the 10 Commandments on the ground, and he says, who is on the Lord's side? And the Bible says the sons of Levi gathered together with Moses. They stood with Moses, and they were the only ones that stood with Moses. And Moses told them, now that you've stood for the Lord, I want you to go through the entire camp and kill all the idolaters. And the Bible says that the Levites took up their swords and they went through the entire camp of Israel and they killed all the idolaters that day, thousands. And they came back and they told Moses what they did. And this is what they did. They ignored who they were killing. It didn't matter if it was their father. It did not matter if it was their mother. They did not consider who they were. They killed the idolaters, even if it was their own brothers, even if it was their own sons. They killed all the idolaters that day. For they kept the word of the Lord and they complied with the covenant. They knew the covenant. They had been around the covenant for years. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. They had gotten the covenant previously when the Lord spoke it down the mountain to them, and Moses had gone up to get it in writing, but they knew that commandment number 1 was, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And number 2, you shall not make unto thee any graven image. And so they complied with the covenant. And let's see what else they did.
They will teach you ordinances to Jacob and your law to Israel. They shall put incense before you and hold burnt offerings on your altar.
So now Moses is saying this is going to be their reward for the fact that they stood with the Lord against their mothers and their fathers and their brothers and the sons, because they wanted to keep the covenant of the Lord and they wanted to keep the nation free from idolatry. They didn't want all those curses from Deuteronomy 28. Remember how bad those were. They didn't want idolaters in the nation. It didn't matter who it was. They killed all the idolaters that day. And what was their reward? Now they're going to become the teachers. The Levites are going to be the teachers to teach the law of the Lord to Jacob. And they're going to burn incense in the tabernacle. They're going to work in the temple. And they're going to be the ones that do the killing and the burning in the tabernacle. It seems like these boys might have been natural-born killers. And the Lord is going to take that natural penchant, that natural bend, that natural desire that Levi has to kill stuff, and He's going to use it at the altar of the Lord. He's going to take Levi's weakness and the Lord is going to make it His strength. He's going to be the special killer in Israel. He's going to be the designated killer for Yahweh. Can you imagine? Amazing. And a little bit more.
Lord, bless his strength and accept the work of his hands.
Moses did not need to pray for Levi to have strength. That was not his problem. He had plenty of strength. He had strength. The Lord said, take his strength and now use it for your glory. Lord, bless his strength. Make his strength not his weakness, but make it something to bless other people and accept the work of his hands. Let the work of his hands now be for good and not for evil.
Smash the hips of those who rise up against him and those who hate him, so that they do not rise again.
Moses prayed for special protection for the Levites. He didn't say kill those that rise up against Levi. He just said maim them. Smash their hips so that they can't get up again, but leave them alive so that they can be a sign to other people. To leave the Levites alone so that they do not rise up again. All right. So, yes, sir.
How many were in the tribe of the Levites?
Thousands and thousands. 20, 30,000, something like that. Most of the tribes had, I think Judah was the, do you have information on that, Leo?
I mean, there was 600,000.
600,000 total. I think Judah was the largest, and they had 60 to 80,000 men.
About 12, you get 50,000 on average.
Yeah, I think Judah was the biggest, and they had 60 to 80,000 men in Judah. Simeon, of course, was the smallest, and that was the one that was absorbed into the big one, Judah. Okay, so, all right, let's move on. What would you say if I told you that there's another Levi in the New Testament, and he has a very similar story? He had some things in his early life that he was probably so ashamed of in his later life. As Levi turned from a vicious, vengeful killer into a godly man that probably taught his children how else would the Levites have known to obey the Lord and to stand with Moses at Mount Sinai if Levi hadn't passed it down to his children. That was part of the law. Tell your children so that they can tell their children so that you can pass the law down to all generations. Apparently, Levi did that because 4 generations later, his great-grandchildren stood with Moses at Mount Sinai against all the idolaters. So there's another guy in the Bible named Levi, and he's probably named after the Old Testament Levi, but let's look at him real quick. We've got about 5 minutes left. Levi is his Hebrew name. You might know him as Matthew. That's his Roman or Greek name. The dual names of Levi and Matthew reflect the multicultural context of his life. He was born a Jew, but he became a follower of Jesus. He might have wanted to change that name from just being known as Levi to show that he's had a change inside. He's now Matthew. Both Levi, Matthew, and the other disciple named James the Lesser are referred to as sons of Alphaeus. So it's possible that Matthew, Levi's brother, was James the Lesser. We're not sure, or there could have been 2 people named Alphaeus. Of course, they recycled names in the Bible. He may have been a Levite, and if so, he would have used his education because the Levites read and wrote. He may have used his education and his clerical skills to work for Rome as a tax collector because that's what he was doing when Jesus found him. Let's read the story of Levi.
After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office.
This is quite possibly the fastest conversion in the Bible. I want you to look at this. This man, for whatever reason, is sitting at the tax office, not collecting taxes for Israel, because taxes were not a thing of Israel. Taxes were imposed upon Israel during the time of Jesus by the Romans who occupied Israel. They had taken over. They were ruling Israel, and there were Romans all around controlling what the Jews were doing during the days of Jesus. And so Jesus is walking by. He sees this Jew named Levi, and he's collecting taxes for basically their enemy, their oppressor, the power that is controlling in their own country. Let me ask you this. Why would a Jew collect taxes for the occupying Roman government? It kind of seems like a traitor, doesn't it? Well, number one, it paid very well. In fact, there are 2 tax collectors that we hear about in the Bible, and they both appear to be very rich men. The reason is the Romans would allow the tax collectors to collect extra and keep it for themselves. And who's going to argue with the Romans, right? They're the power. The Jews have very little power or control over their lives. So number one, financial gain. Number two, if you work for the man will take care of you, right? So probably those that worked for Rome were probably taken good care of by Rome, not just financially, but in protection and other ways. Maybe he had no other way of making this much money. Sometimes dirty money is very lucrative, if you know what I mean. And this was kind of dirty money when the tax collectors can collect more than is reasonable and keep the difference for themselves. And number four, maybe Levi was protesting the corruption that was in the Jewish religion by the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. Those were the religious people, but they weren't the godly people for the most part. They were the ones that conflicted with Jesus. So maybe Levi was dissatisfied, and this was his form of rebellion against the Romans. For whatever reason, Jesus comes by, he sees him, he's collecting taxes for this pagan Roman government. And what does Jesus say?
And he said to him, "Follow me."
This is the quickest conversion in the Bible.
So leaving everything behind, he got up and began to follow Jesus.
That was it. I would like to think that Levi was sitting there waiting for the Messiah. Because as soon as he got his chance, he immediately got up. He left his lucrative job. They were never going to rehire him again because he quit. He walked away from it in the middle of the day, apparently. He began to follow Jesus. He has a great banquet at his house. There's a large crowd of tax collectors because they can't fellowship with anybody else except other tax collectors because they're outcasts. They're working for the Romans. And they came to Jesus and they said, "Why does your master eat and drink with tax collectors? Don't you know they're sinners?" And Jesus said, "These are the people I came for." It's not those who are healthy who need a doctor, but those that are sick. He said, "This man Levi is sick, and I came for him." I didn't come to call the righteous. He's a sinner, and that's exactly who I'm interested in. That's my prime audience, Jesus said. Here's your Bible study to go. Levi's early life was defined by violence, revenge, and a lack of self-control. He was punished by being scattered among Israel instead of receiving a land inheritance like the other tribes. He must have taught his children the commandments of the Lord because 4 generations later, they gathered with Moses and killed all the Israelites who worshiped the golden calf. He seemed to be a natural-born killer, and so were his descendants at the golden calf, but later the Lord turned that killing into usage in the tabernacle. The Levites were tasked with teaching the law to Israel and serving the Lord, and Moses called Levi a godly man. By being scattered among the tribes of Israel in all those different cities that were scattered around the nation, the Levites were already in place to be mediators for the entire nation and to protect the worship of the Lord and to have their eyes out looking for idolatry so that if it ever cropped up, there would be Levites there to crush the idolatry in Israel. All right, Levi seemed to be a man with a penchant for killing, but the Lord took his weakness and turned it into something beautiful. They worked in the temple. The Lord took Levi's killing trait and made it into worship. He appointed the priests to do the work of the killing in the tabernacle. In 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to talk about the Levites, the children that came from Levi. Big difference from killer man to a choral ensemble, right? They look so docile and disciplined. Look at that. Amazing. We're going to cover that in 2 weeks, and then we'll have a third lesson about the cities of the Levites. God bless you. Thank you for coming tonight.